Good evening. We're here to talk a little bit about some of the changes that are going on with the Arlington County Police Department and the restructuring of the agency over the next few months. And I just want to make sure that I had an opportunity to introduce the folks that are here with me tonight to talk about this. To my left, I have Dr. Taylor, past president of the Knox Civic Association, and Andreas Tobar, a very concerned Latino civic member. Julia Spain is with the NAACP, vice president, and Stephanie Pryor with the Arlington County Civic Federation. We're here, like I said, to talk just a little bit about some of the reconfigurations that you may have heard about that are going on with the police department. And what has prompted this to happen over the last couple of years, we've had some challenges about staffing within the agency. It's been mostly a matter of some of it's been funding, some of it has been retention, and some of it has just been a really challenging workplace that we're dealing with in this day and age. If you watch the news at all, this job is not getting any easier. It's becoming more and more of a challenge, and getting people in the workplace is part of that problem. Because of the change in the staffing numbers, we've had to make some adjustments to our overall workforce. What this really means is we are going to make a reallocation of existing resources. And probably the best way to help you understand what that's about, my authorized strength is 370 officers. But currently, I have 320 officers that are actually working on the street. That means I have about 50 officers that are not actively performing, and this is partly because we have about 23 vacancies, but we have a lot of people in training and in different classes in school. And so the real challenge for us is how do we take and make the very best of our existing resources to meet the minimum needs. And I think what I want to make people understand is that we're not moving away from the core fundamental agreements we have with the community, which is on traffic safety, community engagement, and crime prevention and control. But it does mean we have to make some changes to how we allocate those resources. So starting on May 13th, we will be changing our structure around a little bit. And what this ultimately is going to result in is some changes to how we do business. The ones that are probably most prevalent for the folks in this room here today are, you've known that we've been out there, we're doing a lot of services in the community, such as the Neighborhood Day, the Coffee with a Cop, the big events that happen. Things like that are going to have to go away for a little while because I won't have the resources to do it. The other challenge that's going to take place is you typically know we have 3 district teams. We are going to consolidate that down into a single community policing function, which means I'm still going to have people involved in the community policing effort, but as a result, we're going to have to reduce some of the events that we would have gone through traditionally. And I think the other thing that you might see a little bit is we do an awful lot of traffic enforcement in this county. We're very aware of the fact that traffic is the #1 issue, but we've had to make some reductions in our motor officers and some reductions in staff. So while we'll continue to look at motor complaints and still do motor vehicle enforcement, we'll probably have to reduce those things down a little bit. And so it's a combination of reduced staff and realignment that's going to impact us in the operations side. In the criminal investigation side, I don't see a major impact, but I anticipate we'll probably have a change in the cases we prioritize, and we'll probably have to make some adjustments to how much effort we can put into lesser misdemeanor offenses. So some of the lesser crimes, the petty larcenies, the hit and runs, may not receive the attention they would have previously, so we can focus our efforts on our more serious violent crime. So having said that, what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to maybe ask any questions you might have about how this might impact you, or what the consequences might be.
Yes, Chief. In light of the shortages that you just addressed, how will this affect if I call the Emergency Communication Center? Will an officer respond?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, one of the key things of this change is so that we could make sure we upstaffed our operations division, which means that we maintain the maximum number of resources in patrol. So you'll still have the typical response that you would expect. You call 911, you'll get an emergency response. So if anything, that is going to keep us at fully staffed and be able to respond to those.
A lot of times there are a lot of complaints of speeding or other things within communities and neighborhoods. So that whole service will be cut back greatly with the reduction.
Dr. Taylor, we anticipate that there will be some reduction in the amount of cases we can go to. So typically right now, someone has the opportunity to call in the police department, call our special operations section, and they can make a complaint that they're speeding in my neighborhood, speeding on my street. If I have the resources and time available, we'll assign somebody to do a special detail. We'll still do that, but it's going to force us to prioritize them a little bit more than we have in the past and try to really address the more serious violations first.
Chief, you spoke earlier about cutbacks on some of your community outreach events. I know one big event that goes on each year is your block party. Mm-hmm. Could you talk some more about the drawback on some of your community outreach and the way ahead?
Sure. The block party, probably one of the most successful things we've done in the last few years. I think last year we had about 6,000 people come to it. Very well received, but if you were there, you can understand it is extremely intensive resources on manpower, and as a result of the reductions in my overall district teams, we will not be able to do that this year. I anticipate the other one that you might see a little bit is we did not want to not do the community effort. We think that pays great dividends, but instead of going to each individual civic association or civic federation meeting, we may have to ask some to consolidate into a quarterly meeting or bring some resources at one time. So I anticipate we're going to continue doing it. I'd still like to do the coffee with the cops. As you can just anticipate, there'll be a reduction in frequency, and we'll probably have to consolidate some of the smaller groups. But there'll still be a district captain and district teams and specific people you can bring an issue to.
Will there still be availability of community training and outreach and other things that help the cops?
Oh, absolutely. None of this gets abandoned. I think probably the most important thing to remember here is we are not abandoning civic how we police. We are trimming it for a while, but we intend to do this on a temporary basis. As we make the efforts, and I'll talk to some of those in a minute, but as we make efforts to get our staffing back up to where it needs to be, we'll be able to reinvigorate some of the programs. It's just a matter of looking at what we're doing today and continuing to sort of refine those as we bring people back on.
The safety of schools, of students in our schools, is a major concern to all of us. Will there be any impact on the safety resource officers in the schools?
This is one area, and you hit it right on the head. This is a very topical issue, and it's a very troubling issue for us. And we made a conscious decision not to make any reductions at all within the schools. So the 13 SROs that we have now will remain in the schools, and so we have some presence in all the schools, high schools, middle schools, and in elementary schools. So that was a priority, and it will not change.
So, Chief, who should our Arlingtonians contact should they have public safety concerns?
Well, it depends. If you're calling an emergency, obviously it's 911. You can also always call the non-emergency number. However, for those that have been really used to the district format, we will still have a district captain, and you'll still have 2 sets of teams that will go out and help you with that. So I would say continue to use the methods you used in the past for the lesser issues or the non-criminal issues with your district. In this case, it will be the community policing supervisor. Just be patient to understand that where we had 3 teams before and might have a more immediate response, it may take us a little time to move through some of these things, and we're probably going to prioritize them a little bit more distinctly than we did previously. But typical calls for service, non-emergency calls for service, absolutely, they'll remain the same.
With our low crime rate, do we really need this many officers?
That's a question we hear every so often. I think it's really important to note that the most important thing I can tell you about policing in Arlington is our investment in our community, and our investment in the community means we do everything we can to stop it before it becomes a criminal offense. And so where it's going to really hurt us, we've always had a tremendous amount of resources, for example, in Clarendon. We could probably, the numbers of people we could actually arrest down there versus the ones we actually send home in a cab is probably a 10-to-1 ratio. So we want to maintain that contact with the community, and we don't want the arrest be the solution. But that requires people. It actually requires more effort in prevention work and coordinated efforts with our partners than it does to make an arrest. So I would suggest that if people look at just arrest numbers, they're really not seeing the bigger picture of what it takes to make a secure community and a safe community. It's a good question.
Earlier you said that I thought that you were condensing the 3 districts into one.
Right. So we're going to have
explain how, but you just later you said there'll still be a captain over each district.
Yeah, I can't help but use the word districts. Good catch. There's going to be a community policing group that will have a captain in charge of it, but only one. Instead of traditionally we had 3 captains, sergeants, and officers assigned to each district, we're now going to have a single, for lack of a better term, I tend to keep using district because I've used it so long, but we're going to have a single community policing unit. That community policing unit will have a couple of supervisors that work for it and officers, and they'll serve what was traditionally our 3 districts, but we're going to split it down into just north side and south side.
So it sounds like with the community, we can still have an officer come to present. So what type of lead time or other information we would need to provide if we would like an officer?
I think we're sort of in the process of understanding ourselves about how long that was going to take. I think the fair thing to say, though, is in the past, a civic federation president might call up 3rd district captain and say, I've got something coming up a week or 2, and that was enough lead time. I anticipate the lead times are going to change as we go into this, simply because they're going to be managing a much broader scope of meetings to go to, depending on how they contact them. So give us a little bit more time.
How the district resources teams were playing a really great role in reducing crime by being into the community. How do you see reducing this to one district is going to affect your crime prevention efforts of the district teams?
I think it's going to put a little bit of a strain on our ability to provide the same level of service that we could before, and it would be a false premise to tell you that we're going to go out and be exactly the same with less. In this case, it is going to be a little less contact with a little less people, but we're probably going to put a fair amount of that load back on our patrol officers as well. So some of the things that the district teams may have covered in the past, we're going to have to find a way through our operations staff to divvy that work out a little bit more effectively in a little bit different ways. But you know, I think we've invested in this process for so long that we already have pretty solid communications. It's really incumbent upon us to keep building on those communications as we go through this sort of rough period, and as soon as we can start getting staff, think about how we build back up. I think it's really important to remember that this is a temporary, not a permanent restructuring, but one I need to make an adjustment to.
Chief, so with the restructuring and within APS, how was your department plan to measure the effectiveness of the restructuring? And where are you going to be, if you're going to have any shortfalls, and if so, how are you going to redirect much needed assets to those areas in this temporary period?
I think we have a pretty robust in-house reporting capability to see trends and patterns within the county. If we start to see specific things through the GIS office or through arrest or whatever the trending issues are of the day, it may require some level of redirection. For example, we just brought back a GIS specialist, Geographic Information Systems. What they do is they help us map out and digitize exactly where things are going on, and I now have a full-time crime analyst. So we're going to depend on them a little more heavily to show us where the trends are happening. But that's a communication effort between regular patrol officers and the community policing team to sort of figure the best way they can manage that asset for the time being. Very good question.
A reduction will cause you to downgrade your investigative teams. In other words, you're going to have to prioritize what resources you can give to investigating cases and things.
Absolutely. So one of the things we use all the time is we use the solvability factors. And so if we don't have a pretty good solvability factor on a misdemeanor case or a lesser case, that case is going to be probably into a suspended status fairly quickly, because I just won't have the time or resources to invest into a lesser misdemeanor offense when I really want to focus on the people side of the house. So crimes against person, sex crimes, robbery, homicide, the ones that are the more violent crimes, we'll invest more of our effort there. But it doesn't mean we won't look at them, but it's going to require us to be, again, think a little bit more selectively about what we're going to invest investigative effort into.
As a community member who would like to get more involved, what would you suggest that they do to help out?
Well, there's many avenues. I mean, if you're talking specifically about the schools, it's through the school systems and the parent-teachers associations. If you're talking about us, we have different programs that people can volunteer into to assist us. And of course, the county has a volunteer office that can help coordinate some of those efforts as well. I appreciate all the questions. I think it's pretty important to note that, we're going to keep exploring this for the next few months. We're going to see where we go with it. We're going to keep working on it. I think it's important to note that our human resources section are being very aggressive in the police side about how we advertise for the job, where we're advertising for the job. We've made some real investments this last year into some different methodologies that we've never used before to try to get greater outreach. And I'm happy to report we are starting to see some positive effects of that. But keep in mind, if I was to hire somebody today, they're not going to be available to go on the road for at least a year. It's a long process, so it takes some time to get there. And I think it's really important to notice, even with these changes, that I'm extremely proud of the work the men and the women of the Arlington County Police are doing today. I don't anticipate they're not going to continue to provide a high level of service, just a little bit more of a challenge. And I'm confident that, as we work through this over the next year and a half collectively, we'll be able to get to the hump and get back to where we need to be. So I appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you.